insurance in particular, across all verticals, I haven't found an industry yet where the consumer and the business motivation is more closely aligned, because people don't want to have to go through poor experiences or a claim event, and nor does the insurer. They are incentivized not to have that event happen or not to have the consumer impacted by that event. So that drives purpose for a lot of organizations, and that's what gets me excited about innovation in the space. Hi, I'm David Worldon, the founder and principal consultant of Accelerated Innovation, a boutique management consultancy, and this is the future of insurance.
David, it's really good to have you on the show. I'm still buzzing from my time in Australia, and you were one of the first people I got to meet at this event that I was at from InsurTech Australia. So continuing that energy on, it's good to have you on the show.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And it's cool for me because I want to bring more of the perspective of, frankly, markets other than the US and Western, like Western Europe, UK, kind of, even that I don't get to feature that much, but there's like the established insurance mainstream markets. And then I think for a lot of us in these markets, we don't have a true awareness of what's going on elsewhere. Greatest example I always have is people who just presume Canada is just like the US, just nicer. And their market is wildly different from the US market. Regulations, products, et cetera. I think there's probably a lot of people who presume Australia is kind of similar to the UK market, for example, or maybe Canada or whatever. And it's such a different dynamic.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to hear kind of that framing and to help educate folks here, but then understand, well, what does that mean for innovation, for the market, for where things are headed, and just excited to get your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I guess equally, that's one of the things I enjoy about your pod is hearing perspectives of other insurers and other carriers in other markets and understanding the differences of those, because we do have yes, we are small by global standards, but we do have a somewhat some unique dynamics, I guess, that drive our industry and influence decisions that are made, and not just within carriers, not with just with distributors, but also with regulation and policy, and then sort of how the government behaves as well.
Yeah. Well, give us a quick, overview of you and Accelerated Innovation so people can understand kind of your perspective and context, and then we'll dig into the Australian market and kind of what that means going forward from an innovation standpoint and the path ahead and some of the difficulties that the market faces.
Yeah, sure. So Accelerated Innovation is a boutique management consultancy that helps complex organizations, primarily insurers, transform ideas into outcomes. So over the last 12 months, I've been lucky enough to work with some of Australia's largest insurers to help them save $500,000 in consulting fees, but also take a year off their growth timelines. The thing that frustrated me through 20 years of working inside, client side for many insurers and complex organizations in Australia and abroad was that every time they wanted to do something a little bit different, a little bit innovative, something that's a little bit out of the norm, it was generally slow, expensive, and/or ineffective. And despite these environments, I realized that my superpower was the ability to break through some of this sort of red tape that exists inside these environments and just push things forward where others haven't been able to, and really get things off paper into something tangible in consumers' hands, being an efficiency update within the organization or whatever it may be. So Accelerated Innovation was really established off the back of that lived experience of frustration, knowing that there is a better way for large, complex organizations, particularly insurers, to innovate more effectively, efficiently, and affordably. So that's kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning. And I think I'm one of those nerds that wakes up and actually gets excited about working in insurance, as I'm sure you are as well. And I think insurance in particular, across all verticals, I haven't found an industry yet where the consumer and the business motivation is more closely aligned, because people don't want to have to go through poor experiences or a claim event, and nor does the insurer want to have to, they are incentivized not to have that event happen or not to have the consumer impacted by that event. So I think I love that drives purpose for a lot of organizations, and that's what gets me excited about, particularly about innovation in the space.
I'm just thinking about like the car. You have the car falls apart, and I'm just coming back from a service appointment myself, so this is front and center. But yeah, the dealership, the car manufacturer, the part suppliers, all of them financially do better when the car is made worse.
Yes.
When I suffer for the product and insurance, yeah, we're sort of on the same side. Like, I don't want a tree falling through my house. I'm very glad to have the protection should that happen, but I would much rather it not happen, just as my insurer would rather that not happen as well. They're not better off if it does. It's
Yeah,
interesting. I never thought about
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, look, and saying that there's not a perfect alignment of consumers wanting insurance.
Sure.
Obviously, no one wants to go through that event, and insurance certainly in markets that I've worked in is primarily a grudge purchase, and it's the first thing. It's certainly in Australia at the moment. We've seen enormous premium increases being driven through over the past sort of 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
and it is top of mind for a lot of consumers as far as that affordability, and that is a pretty significant challenge in our
Yeah.
market. So it's not something that people love purchasing because it's something they don't hope to use. But as far as alignment, there's definitely alignment of not wanting bad things to happen.
Yeah. Well, that rate movement is not an Australian issue. I had Andrew Horton on the show to kick off the season, CEO of QBE, talking about that at a global scale, and it is a global issue absolutely right now. I can't think of a geography with a sort of modern, mature insurance market that isn't going through substantial rate increases because of a lot of the same drivers: natural catastrophe activity, inflation. Certainly in the US, we've had a lot of agitation and adversarialness driving some of that activity, but there's similar things happening everywhere. Australia's got something very unique, though, when I look at the makeup of the market, and that's something you and I have chatted about, but the level of concentration. I honestly can't think of another free market, maybe in like a controlled market where the government is the insurer, or, a communist or dictatorship kind of setting. I don't know. But a free market, modern, mature insurance market where you've got very few domestic carriers who have, I don't know, half of the market, is a very large proportion. And that changes the dynamics dramatically. So can you sort of paint the picture of the Australian market?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, yes, we do have a unique market in that sense that around 45 to 50% of market share in Australia is underwritten by two carriers, and those
Wow.
carriers only have exposure to Australia and New Zealand markets. So, two large insurers, IAG and Suncorp, they have made various plays in other markets geographically, but also in business lines, but have very much fallen back into having that local presence and just being top shelf under or carriers
Yeah.
for the Australia and New Zealand markets. And then I guess you've got sort of the next 30% of the market is made up by some global insurers in QBE. You've spoken to Andrew, Allianz, big European insurer, and Hollard, South African insurer. So, and then you've sort of got this another 15 players, including some significant global players, like with the likes of Zurich, fighting for the sort of the remaining 20% of the
Yeah.
market. But for some of the major carriers, major global carriers, Australia is such an insignificant and small market, but also a market from a risk perspective. It feels like Australia is always on fire or always flooding or always
Yeah.
got cyclones. So it does create a unique dynamic in the market, particularly with reinsurance costs, with I guess flowing through to premium costs for the consumers is with almost half of the market concentrated risk just on Australian markets, that's going to flow through to consumers in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah. And you mentioned New Zealand as well. I often see like ANZ or Australia and New Zealand grouped together. Are they genuinely together? I know they're separate countries. I'm American, but I'm not that off on geography. I do know that they're separate. But market wise, does it sort of operate as one supermarket, or is it really two distinct markets that people lump together because of the kind of the proximity and shared language and British history?
Yeah, it's more the latter. I think you do have a bunch of insurers in the New Zealand market that operate just in the New Zealand market, but over
Mm.
over time they have primarily been acquired by Australian
Yeah.
carriers. So they go from sort of market leading and being, I guess, probably an innovative top of market to being a really small carrier in a really large business or
Yeah.
business, but in relative terms for the Australian New Zealand market. I feel sorry for a lot of New Zealand carriers that do get bought up because it feels like New Zealand is sort of treated, I guess, by Australian from an investment point of view, Australian businesses as the population is about the size of a state in
Yeah.
Australia. So
Yeah.
it's not treated like a state. They have their own market dynamics and it's kind of unique regulation and those sorts of things, unique risk exposures. They're on a fault line and they have earthquakes and volcanoes and all these sorts of things, different risks. But they do operate largely as independent businesses with the
Yeah.
benefit of some scale across the carriers who do exist across both geographies.
Does does the market, maybe this is more an Australian question, but perhaps New Zealand too, does the market have in the US we've got a lot of we've got our big players, but then there's like tons of sort of sub 250 million or even sub $100 million carrier, these these little carriers that are not besmirching their size, relatively speaking, very small players in tight geography, tight lines of business, like single state, single line of business.
Yeah.
Do you have that as well, this sort of like smattering of small players, or is it really just kind of the top 20 and that's it?
No, we really do. So each state historically have had their own automobile club or motoring club,
Yeah.
which primarily offered roadside assistance. Often that has been coupled with insurance, which has been underwritten by those that they have been their own carriers. Interestingly, a lot of those have existed through history in the state that I live in, where Sydney is in New South Wales. The motoring club and the insurer actually split about 25 years ago.
Yeah.
They still share a brand, but they are run as independent businesses. But you do have these host of other carriers in the other major states that are primarily based on that. But sorry, interestingly, we're seeing at the moment a bit of market consolidation in the Australian market, and they are certainly high targets. We've just seen the motoring club or the kind of the main state carrier in South Australia be acquired by Allianz. We're seeing the motoring club in Western Australia, which is insurance carrier as well. They have pretty strong market share over there. They're up for sale at the moment. It looks like Allianz or IAG, one of the major carriers in Australia, is probably going to pick them up, assuming government approval. Also, another state-based carrier in Queensland called RACQ has also just been acquired by IAG. So we are seeing a level of consolidation happen, sort of going from, look, we do have sort of 20 underwriters in
Yeah.
Australia. We only have a population of 25 million people and about, I think it's 12 or 13 million households. So there is reasonably high competition at the moment. We are seeing a level of consolidation
Yeah.
play out in the current market. And I expect that will probably continue over the next couple of years. So there will be less of those state-based carriers,
Yeah.
the smaller niche carriers, and we'll see, I guess, sort of some of that market share bought up by some of the bigger players.
So I know you have exposure to the broader insurtech and innovation discussion globally through your podcast and some of the work that you do. I'm curious your take on how some of these market dynamics that are a bit different in Australia play out when it comes to innovation. Like what is all, that's all fascinating what we've been talking about, and kind of so what, right? So what does that mean going forward for the industry, and what are maybe some of the complications or unique opportunities that exist because of that?
Yeah, if I look to the future of insurance in Australia, we are seeing, I mean, as it is in most markets, it's a highly regulated industry, but
Yeah.
we are seeing an increasing amount of intervention from regulators and governments in Australia, and some of that is warranted, particularly because we do have parts of the country that are a far greater risk exposure than others. So in Northern Australia, as an example, over the last 15 years, the premiums in Northern Australia have tripled,
Well,
whereas in the rest of the country, they've sort of doubled or less than doubled. So we're starting to see this kind of protection gap open up. 35% of Australians are either uninsured or underinsured. So
yeah.
we are seeing some, particularly that kind of Northern Australia, I'll call it a North Australia gap. So Northern Australia is more prone, it's closer to the equator, it's tropical and subtropical, so more exposure to flooding, to cyclones, and some of these major natural disasters. We've just seen just recently a cyclone hit Brisbane for the first time in, I believe, about 50 years, right?
Yeah, very recently.
Yeah, it's sort of in the last last couple of weeks. So I think in terms of what's driving the industry most significantly, I think those natural disasters, the increasing frequency, the increasing intensity, is driving insurers to really focus more on innovation around prevention and risk mitigation. So saying that it's pretty slow. The carriers do move pretty slowly. So if I was to take a punt on, and certainly from what I'm seeing in the market, a lot of innovation in the industry is happening on a distributor side. So because the underwriters and the carriers are quite large in relative terms for the Australian market, they are large, they're generally slow-moving beasts, their technology stacks aren't necessarily up to scratch, particularly because a lot of their growth has been inorganic, so they
Yeah.
haven't quite reached the levels of scale that they might have foreseen in their business cases over the years. So they are focused on doing that, and in the meantime, they're just trying to be a good carrier and be the best insurer they can be. So we are seeing innovation occur more in the distribution space, which is, I think that's exciting because another thing that's unique about the Australian market is that most of the market is disintermediated in the personal line space,
Hmm.
which I think is quite different from a lot of other markets in sort of North America and Europe. So direct insurance, so digital insurance and direct insurance play a really key role in decision making for consumers. So, therefore, distributors, and I'll use an example. I'm sure you're aware of Honey Insurance is a great
Yeah.
example that we've seen in the last couple of years in the Australian market. That if you buy, and that is underwritten by RACQ, right, one of the major carriers, if you buy a Honey insurance, you can put some sensors in your home, and that will help bring your premiums down because
Yeah.
it's really about this kind of risk detection, risk mitigation. And I think we'll see more of that. I think we'll see more of that play out in the future. We're seeing in the motor space as well, we are seeing some of the insurers through distributors and through partnerships start to look at telematics, start to look at risk preventative driving. I mean, even it's almost 10 years ago now when I worked on an innovation for a major carrier in that kind of space of mobility of going, okay, well, how do we focus on getting people, if there's a hailstorm coming, how do we encourage them to move their vehicle under cover?
Yeah.
Or if they're taking corners too fast, how do we make sure that we're kind of reducing the risk or the likelihood of them having an accident? Or if they're driving at this time of day when there's lots of traffic on the road, how do we encourage them to take other modes of transport or whatever it might be? We are starting to see that. But Australia is a bit of a laggard in some of this stuff. So we do look to the US, we do look to Europe and the UK for inspiration and motivation. From a carrier side, from the distributor side, I think they're very much kind of leading the charge
Yeah.
as far as innovation goes, and it's a far lower barrier to entry.
Is that giving your point on the penetration of direct sales in personal lines? Does that mean there's more activity from an innovation standpoint in commercial lines, or it's alternative, like Honey, like newer ideas coming to personal lines that can be distributed direct because that's people are turning to that channel anyway?
Yeah, look, there are elements of um, innovation in the commercial lines, but from what I have seen, it is much lower. It's really about that broker experience. Is
Yeah.
how do we, and the digital plays a key role there. Is like how do we just give that optimum broker experience so we are the preferred carrier or insurer when the consumer is looking at their options with their broker. But I would say direct has been where we've seen most of the innovation
Yeah.
occur.
Is there um is there activity on the embedded front in the market?
Look, there is a little bit. We start to see point of sale. We start to see embedded insurance OEMs that are entering the market in the motor space. We are seeing a large shift in the OEMs, in the
Yeah.
kind of the Australia's fleet. So if you go back sort of 20 or 30 years, most cars in Australia were manufactured in Australia.
Yeah.
There are now no vehicles manufactured in
No, all the
Australia.
plants were shut down. Yeah.
Yeah, so
A lot of Chinese vehicles on the roads.
now we have a lot of Chinese vehicles,
Yeah.
a lot of Kias, a lot of Korean, and a
Yep.
lot of Japanese vehicles, Toyota and the like. We're starting to see some American carriers coming in. We're starting to see Dodge enter the market. Who else is entering the market? Tesla, a lot of Teslas coming
Yeah.
through, and European, I guess the sort of the luxury brands. And then, so we do have this kind of interesting dynamic, but again, we are a small population. So whether there is enough scale benefit for this kind of, or potentially as a test market, could be useful in Australia
Yeah.
for some of these kind of global OEMs coming in and thinking about how do we actually integrate insurance into that experience. But I haven't seen anything that's truly breakthrough or innovative come out of Australia yet.
I'm really torn as I look at the market because the population is quite advanced. There's, good technology, in market. And because it is sort of like cordoned off, it's really far away. So that, that stops like, just go over the border and, Switzerland and Germany and France, like it's all intertwined. So I could see carriers wanting to use it to try something new. I see the population, at least my take on it, which could be totally wrong, um, seems to be a lot more open-minded than like Canada has not really embraced digital distribution, not just in insurance more broadly. They're behind on, online retail sales, for example.
Yep.
That doesn't feel like it's as much the case in Australia. People are highly mobile, mobile device centric, embrace digital. They seem more open-minded. They seem less risk averse as a population, maybe not in the insurance world, I don't know, but it seems like there's all these things in place for it actually to be the cutting edge part of the like established insurance market. But I get the sense that's not how it's playing out from the way you're describing it.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a few underlying drivers there. I do know that the industry. So in Australia, there was a what's called a Royal Commission into the insurance industry and financial services industry about going 5 or 7 years ago in
Okay.
Australia. So Royal Commission is basically where the government, the federal government, investigates an industry where it sees like it looks like there might have been some malpractice or some kind of system misbehavior, and
Mhm.
they take put a spotlight on the industry and spend a lot of time investigating. So what that did, and a lot of that was driven by actually there was some sort of some I would say some bad players in certain verticals in certain parts of the market. Life insurance got
Yeah.
absolutely slammed. Components of general insurance absolutely got slammed and put under the microscope. So what that has done is actually driven this culture of being, insurers are risk averse by nature. That is their
Yeah.
business model, but it's added this extra layer of risk or risk mitigation and risk management that if you think about who were the leaders of the organizations at those times in the C-suite, who were the leaders below them, they have come through this environment not unscathed. They've come through this environment with a reputation to uphold where the whole industry has been impacted by this spotlight that was put on it through the Royal Commission. So I think that's been a really significant driver. And as a result, I guess the industry is an easy punching bag for regulators and government to go, well, insurers, and this probably links back to earlier what we're saying about the with the competition and the market in Australia, because it is highly politicized,
Yeah.
it's really easy for insurers to be a punching bag. So I think that just helps. It doesn't necessarily encourage insurers to be innovative. It actually encourages them to sort of stay in their lane, just do risk really well and do risk
Yeah.
management. And I think that's been sort of to the detriment of innovation and genuine forward thinking and sort of being on that cutting edge in the Australian market.
Yeah. Um, it's too bad. While I was over, and I have no clue who it was. I don't follow politics in Australia, I'll admit. Some member of the government made a statement about that the insurance company should be broken up and split apart and all that. And that was sort of the on top of the conversation at the conference. That was the other talk of the town in the industry. So yeah, and that felt very. I felt at home, right? Insurance getting attacked and politicized, and rightly or wrongly, people can take sides, but that's nothing new or unique to Australia. But yeah, it was particularly sensitive comment. What going forward, does that do you think that the market in Australia and the players stay sort of boxed in by this, or do you think that, look, this is a moment in time, like, the sort of global political tone that this too shall pass, and it can get its feet under itself and really start to innovate? Because I did feel this energy from the community that we want to do more. Do you think that gets to win out, or look, it's always going to be a bit behind?
No, I think it does. I think we're at a bit of a tipping point on that. I think probably the Royal Commission is far enough behind us, and then they had sort of had COVID to deal with and all the impacts of that. So that really, I have a lot of skin in the game with this because I guess I help insurers focus on growth initiatives and adjacent and new markets and new products and in innovation. And a lot of conversations with leaders in the market has not been, they just haven't been there in the last few years, right? They've been focused on just getting their house in order. So that's Royal Commission, that's COVID. There was some kind of knock-on impacts for that where they had risk exposures that they didn't realize they had through some policy wording and things like that. So they've held hundreds of millions of dollars in provisions and all these kind of things. They're now starting to be able to release some of those things and now start to think about, okay, what's next? So I think that links into, we're starting to see some inorganic growth happen with the major carriers, some consolidation. And I think they've also focused on their technology to get their kind of that house in order and sort of operationalize themselves for scale. And I think they're now in a good position with reasonably strong capital and sort of financial positions to now invest in that next wave of growth. So I do think we will see more happen over the next 5 years, an increased appetite on taking a little bit more risk, and particularly I think around, look, and you talk about this a lot, around the biggest way to have an impact is not by focusing on your kind of your management expense and bringing that down 1%, because if you reduce that by 1% on a business that's losing money, you're still losing money, right? So if you can focus on your claims, and that's where 75% of your cost base is going, or whatever the number is for the carrier, 85%, whatever it might be, is you if you can have an impact on that at scale, then that's when you can really shift the needle. And so I think that's where we're going to see most of the innovation occur. And some of the insurers have spoken publicly about this, as they think the biggest impact is around risk mitigation and around helping people prepare for the future, prepare for natural disasters, prepare and rebuild better. And I know Andrew Horton spoke about this, is all of the insurers have focused on this. We're not just going to rebuild your home, we're going to rebuild it better, right? Like is when something goes wrong, we're going to make sure that next time it stands up, or it is, it's got better infrastructure, or it's ready for the next event, so that you don't have to go through this traumatic experience as significantly as you had this time. On the other side, I think we'll see more distribution disruption come in, because the distributors aren't as bound by the regulation. There's a lower barrier to entry. We may see some global players enter the market that don't currently exist in insurance. Like I said, Australia could be the right market for a test market for some global digital players, brands that are well trusted and well regarded, have strong data plays, and that trust. Insurance is kind of ripe for that. And if you've got the right carriers with the right appetite in the Australian market, which you do, because it is quite a competitive market, and now with, I guess, a bit less focus on risk, a bit more focus on growth, I think we're in the right position to see some of these innovations start to break through in the next 5 or 10 years.
Well, I certainly, for as short a trip as I had, and as much travel and exhaustion as it took for that trip, I came away with so much energy for the market. And, I'm going back shortly for the exact same thing, like way too short of a trip with way too much travel. But I'm still like, I can't wait to get back. There's something about the Australian market, the Australian insurance community, that really just invigorated me. So it's exciting to hear you talk about that possibility, that like there is this moment where we're turning the corner and possibilities are there. And I got the feeling that the people are actually ready for that and interested in that. So it may not be in time for my next trip, but at least I know it's building towards something, and it'll be exciting to watch that.
Yeah, definitely. Look, there's definitely an appetite. I think, again, some few system challenges to work through around that kind of protection gap and underinsurance, and but you do have now probably for the not the first time, but most effectively, you've got carriers starting to work together and work with government
Yeah.
to fix some of these system issues, and they know that they'll all come out stronger as a result of that and have the ability to thrive
Yeah.
in the future state.
What's good. Often I talk doom and gloom about the tough moment that the industry's in, and you've brought some hope and opportunity. So we'll leave it on that note. But David, thank you so much for the time and bring that perspective and outlook for the Australian and New Zealand markets.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Been great to chat.